All right, today we are going to learn about the three R's: reducing, reusing, and recycling. And I hope that you have heard these all of your life. If not, then some science teacher somewhere is failing you. This is the biggest, or one of the biggest things that we know and talk about in environmental education, and one of the things that the general public know. So you might not have known that, I don't know, like you might not have known the rock cycle or how mining and fracking is hurting the earth, but hopefully you've at least heard the words reducing, reusing, and recycling. But today we're going to study the difference between the three, and actually there's one that is superior or far better than the others, and we'll learn about that today. So what do you know about recycling? Hopefully you know like the things you can recycle, like I can't really recycle pizza boxes. Are you sure? I can't really recycle pizza boxes. My peanut crowd, my sister here, is telling me I can't recycle greasy pizza boxes, so used ones. You can't recycle like styrofoam, but there are other things you can recycle like aluminum cans and plastic bottles. So we know that we can recycle some things, and there's actually, I'll look for it for you so we can know. But there's a number on the bottom of most of our plastic things, and it'll tell us whether or not we can recycle it. But recycling is the reprocessing of material to another product. So you're changing it in some ways. Like when you recycle aluminum can, it's melted down back into the aluminum and then reformed into a can. Now, aluminum and like cans, like soup cans, are almost always recycled. We actually don't even recycle glass here anymore in North Carolina. But aluminum and tin, like our cans, the metals are almost always recycled. Plastics are not always recycled. So that's why when you buy a soft drink like soda, like Pepsi or Coke, you should buy it in a tin can, like an aluminum can, instead of a bottle, because you know that if you recycle that bottle or the can, you put it in the recycling, it's going to be recycled. But not all plastic bottles are recycled, especially as we think about like the different types of water bottles that we have. If you've ever bought like cheaper quote unquote water, like maybe what you would drink at school, it doesn't have a stick of a plastic, and generally those can't be recycled. But like our thicker plastic water bottles, like you think of like the Smart Water comes in a really thick plastic bottle, even like the Aquafina or Dasani, like those water bottles are pretty thick. Most of those can be recycled, although not always. But recycling is when we reprocess it. So we're going to melt it down and form something new. So we're still using the same material, but we've got to remake it. What do you know about reusing? Hopefully you know quite a bit, or you can have some general ideas. Maybe you are like a reusable straw is flashing in your mind, or a reusable bag, or a reusable water bottle. Those are all things that we might reuse. But this is when we use the product in its original form, but in a new way. Like if you look at this shoebox here, I am using it as storage for what looks like stationery and Sharpies and some other things maybe. So it was once a shoebox, I'm reusing it now to um, in just a different way. I don't even know what you would call that. Um, you can reuse like old bottles, and I know it's fancy to like buy reusable water bottles and stuff like that, but a lot of the things that you might think to throw away, you can actually reuse. Like tin cans can be reused to hold pencils, or it looks like popsicle sticks here. We can reuse, like I reuse like V8 bottles, like the big ones that you might put in soup. I reuse those to hold water to water my plants with instead of buying a watering can. One, because I'm cheap, and two, because it was already there. I had it anyways. You can reuse like gift bags. So when you're wrapping your stuff at Christmas, it might be a better idea to wrap things in a gift bag instead of like with wrapping paper, because that wrapping paper is going to be thrown away unless you reuse it, or maybe don't even wrap your stuff at all, or wrap it in newspaper. So even wrapping your gifts in newspaper would be reusing something, because you're repurposing that newspaper. My grandpa does that. You can always tell when a present is from grandpa because he wraps it in newspaper instead of actual wrapping paper. Now, is he trying to save the environment? Probably not. Is he trying to save a buck? Probably. So whatever the reason, reusing can be beneficial. And then what do you know about reducing? So reducing is when we reduce or use more efficient ways to consume material. So I know that is very vague, but reducing is just generally not using as much of. So for example, one of my friends uses when she wipes up a spill with like paper in her kitchen with paper towels, instead of just using like one paper towel, she wraps her hand around in the paper towel and uses like 6. She definitely doesn't need all 6 of those paper towels. She could reduce what she uses. Other things that you could reduce on, I'm trying to think off the top of my head. I can't think of any, but it'll come to me eventually as we go on. If I think of it, I'll remind you, but we'll continue on with the lecture. So just generally not using as much of, or being more efficient. Oh, here's an example. So we can reduce material used in the production of manufactured goods. Like if you look at these soda cans, they are made of 2 different materials actually. So one of them has more aluminum in them than the other. This one has, the gray one right here, has more aluminum than this one. This one has aimed to reduce the amount of metal used to manufacture the can. The same thing is can happen with plastic water bottles, and I don't have a example, but like I talked about the water bottles, many times the cheap quote-unquote water bottles are thinner. They use less plastic. That's one of the reasons why they're cheaper. So that's reducing the amount of plastic in the actual water bottle. We can reduce in our toxicity, so using non-toxic cleaners or things that maybe don't pollute the environment. So like cleaning with baking soda and vinegar instead of using like bleach, although I am a big fan of bleach, so I don't know if I'm going to be so good at reducing my toxicity. This might be a good idea just for your life in general. Maybe use less toxic things. Like they're finding that a lot of the shampoos that you use are actually pretty toxic or not as good for your hair as we thought. A lot of your beauty products as well. Men, you also use beauty products. So like we talked about deodorant the other day and how that has some things in it you might not want in there. As well as like maybe stepping back from the hairspray or just not using as much of things in general. Like shampoo is a good example for me. It took until I actually started buying my own shampoo that I used it sparingly, or I used just a little bit of it. I used to, when I was younger, just glob it on, and I would waste a lot of it. A lot of it would go down the drain. But as I grew up and had to start buying my own, I started reducing the amount of shampoo I use each time on my hair. That's helped my wallet, but not only the environment, because there's less pollutions going down the drain. You can buy, another way you can reduce is to increase useful life through durability and repairability. That is big and fancy words, but that means just reducing the amount of plastic you use. So like using, this is a big one, using regular plates, like plates you have to put in the dishwasher instead of using paper plates. That is very helpful for our environment. Same with silverware. Using reusable bags as well is good for the environment because you're reducing your use of plastic. Reusable water bottles, reusable silverware when you're on the go, or straws, or I think this looks like chopsticks, not actual straws. So you can reduce your, it's called single-use plastic, like the plastic bags and the plastic styrofoam to-go containers and the plastic plates. Those are single-use plastics. So as far as reduce, reuse, and recycle goes, reduction is our most favored way to reduce or to lessen our environmental impact, is to just simply use less. It's the easiest, and it helps to prevent the use of it in general. So if you're looking at this triangle right here, prevention is the same thing as reduction. So use a little bit of it. Minimalization again is reduction. So we're using just as little as we can. If we can't reduce what we use, so we don't use it at all, we're going to want to reuse it and then move to recycling. So of the 3, reduce, reuse, and recycle, recycling is actually quote-unquote the worst or the least favorite option for the environment, although often that is what we find people know the most about. So one of the purposes of this lecture is for you to realize that simply reducing or not using as much of things is going to be a lot better for the environment than recycling. And the hierarchy has its limitations. Production and consumption are far more important needs to address than disposal, meaning that meaning that the way we make our products and how we use our products is a lot easier to control than disposal. So how our products are put into the landfill. So that would be something, if we focus less on the disposal, like solving the trash problem, like we're running out of space to put our trash is one of our issues that maybe we'll talk about. Yeah, we'll talk about it. If we simply use less, or we use less products in our production and we consume less, then disposal won't be as big of a problem. Where does our trash go, you might wonder? So say it doesn't even make it to the recycling, or just in general, only 31% of our consumed goods are recycled, 69%, or the majority of it, about 70%, goes into the landfill. Just so you know, you produce about 4.5 pounds of trash a day. That's a lot of trash. Some of you might produce more, some of you might produce less. Things that might increase your trash production are using single-use plastics, or eating a lot of food out, because often that leads to a lot of takeout containers and trash. There is a difference between a dump and a landfill, although sometimes we use the words interchangeably. A dump is a hole where trash is dumped. It's not very structured. You can just put it in there any which way. A landfill is a structured place where trash is deposited. Landfills actually have quite a history of how they were formed, and they've got a lot to them. So they've got a specific structure and way that you put them together. We'll talk about that at the end of the lecture. So there's a little bit of history of landfills. I don't know if you've ever wondered, but I always like to tie in history. Before the 1960s, most waste was just buried in open dumps, so we just threw it in the ground, dug a hole, threw our trash in, covered the hole back up. This produced a lot of clouds of smoke. Sometimes they would catch fire, definitely bad odors, and created a breeding ground for flies and rats, so we decided this was not the best way. Before, in the early 1960s, so our next solution was, well, let's burn our waste. Let's throw it in an incinerator and burn it. And what that ended up in is having a lot of smoke and definitely a lot of air pollution, so that was not good. In the 1960s and 70s, there were laws passed that regulated air pollution, which meant we could no longer just burn our waste. We had to think of another solution. The solution was landfills, and that's when we converted our dumps into landfills in the 1970s. From 1988 to 2001, the number of landfills declined from 8,000 to 1,858 in the U.S., although I think that's definitely wrong now. I think there are probably way more than 1,000 landfills and dumps in the U.S. That might be for the state. Due to landfill size, recycling has increased and regulations are tighter, so we're running out of space to put our trash. Recycling has been one of our solutions for that issue. We're just simply recreating, again, or repurposing our already used materials, but that's only one solution. And regulations are getting tighter. Some of the challenges to a landfill: many landfills, if they're not done properly, will contaminate groundwater. So we talked about most of the water we drink is actually found underwater in aquifers or groundwater. Those contaminants, kind of like, if you can imagine, like a rotting food produces juices, and whatever else is in your trash produces juices. Those can sink into the ground and contaminate the groundwater. Definitely not good. I don't want to drink that. Methane production from anaerobic decomposition of trash. Methane, again, is a greenhouse gas, so producing more of it is not good for our environment. Incomplete decomposition. We found newspapers in landfills that have been up to 100 years old. That means that we think they're rotting and decomposing, but they're actually not, so that's been an issue. As trash decomposes, it compacts and settles, which can cause the landfills to sink. And most neighborhoods oppose having a landfill built in their vicinity because they are very stinky. Here's how a landfill is actually made, and this will be the last part of our lecture. We'll skim through it real quick. So at the very bottom of our layer, we've got a clay layer, which is first laid in the landfill to form a barrier to prevent lactate leaks, to protect the soil and hold the trash in place. Clay is used because it's moldable and it's impermeable, meaning not much is going to leak through this. Then we have a geomembrane, a plastic layer. This is again going to try and protect from the leaks and getting the leakage into the groundwater. We've got a leakage pipe system which collects the lactate and pumps it out of the landfill because that's what actually contaminates it. We've got some sand and gravel which help to funnel the icky, gross, wet stuff out of it. We put waste there and we compact it. Each day we cover it.